I'm a preacher's kid, and growing up as a preacher's kid at church during the not Sunday school, but the church time, I knew there were verbal cues for when to put my shoes back on and when not to bother. And one of the phrases that I knew it didn't mean what you wanted it to mean was "and in conclusion," because it was rarely the conclusion. It was kind of only a bridge to the next thought. Well, in First Peter chapter 3, verse 8, Peter writes, "Finally, spoiler alert, this is not really the end of what he's got to say. He's got another couple of, he didn't write in chapters, but what we have, there's still a couple of more chapters left. But what he says here offers, I think, some of the best relational advice that you're going to find anywhere. This is God's design for a healthy relationship. And actually, I think Peter is writing it in the context of the relationships between folks in God's family. Well, let me read the passage. I want to read the whole passage because we need it in context. Then we're going to go back and kind of pull it apart. "Finally, all of you, be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called so that you may inherit a blessing. For whoever would love life and see good days must keep their tongue from evil and their lips from deceitful speech. They must turn from evil and do good. They must seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil." And Peter is quoting Psalm 34 as he, says these things. But so let's go back and get to the beginning of this whole passage. And like I said, let's pull it apart for meeting. "Finally, all of you." And this is an interesting thing to me because in a church, I've got quite a long history of experience with the church. I think I was in church from within the first week of my birth and maybe within the first 3 or 4 days of my birth. I've told you before, at our house, unless you were bleeding from a significant organ or you had a fever of 103, you were at church. And baseball games, nope. Church. If there was a conflict, it was always church. Concerts, nope. It was church. Always won the battle. Well, I'm getting over that slowly. But so what I'm saying is I got a long history within the church. And one of I'd call it interesting, honestly, it's vexing aspects of life in the church is that there are people who don't think all of the policies and all of the requirements, all of the expectations are for them. Every church is made up of many, many people who believe they're exceptional. In other words, when Peter writes, "Finally, all of you," the reason he said that, in my opinion, is because we tend to believe we're kind of the exception, right? All of those, absolutely, that applies to them and them. Okay, I know, man, you talk about, okay, there's where it really needs to. No. All of you, every single one of us. You think you're good at any of these attributes or qualities in relationships, even you. And actually, as I said here, pointing at my screen, I'm pointing at me. Even me. I'm a human relations professional, trained with a master's degree. Even me. All of you. Pay attention. This is like Peter is going, hey, hey, hey. Okay, here, everybody's going to dance to the same tune here. All of you be like-minded. Boy, is that a hard thing today. In 2020, July of 2020, there are so many different opinions being voiced in so many different ways. The battle lines have been drawn between conservatives and liberals and neoconservatives and neoliberals, and racial lines have been drawn. Lines of social justice have been drawn. There's a line for everything. And you're going to be on one side or the other of the line. You don't get a choice. There's rarely a way to walk the middle. It's a tough place to find yourself in, especially if you're a person who holds values because you have thought them through. It's easy to just go with the flow. That's not what Peter's talking about. He wants people to be like-minded. Now, some people say our greatest need is that everybody should be open-minded. I don't disagree completely with that, but my experience is there are some people who are so open-minded, their brains are falling out. That's not what Peter's asking for. That's not what he's advocating. Be like-minded. Do we have to agree on everything? Can we be like-minded and yet disagree on certain points? I believe we can, because he doesn't say have the same exact opinions about everything. He says be like-minded. When two people are like-minded, they hold a common objective. They don't necessarily have the exact same feelings, even thoughts about the same objective, but they do have the same objective. And in God's family, we've got to remember we need to keep our minds on the central objective, the objective that we all buy into. And that objective, in its most noble sense, its most theological sense, is to become more and more like Jesus. To be like-minded in a church is a very difficult thing to do. Churches have split and exploded. Others have imploded because they were not able to be like-minded. Because they let things that started small. I don't know of a single church split that was just like a huge bomb was dropped in an instant and blew the place to pieces. It was more like erosion. And part of that erosive process was that people found it not possible to be like-minded. When we lose track of our primary objective, of our highest, most noble goal, we can't be like-minded. Then we have to drag everybody over into our opinionated corner, believing that that's going to make us all like-minded. And I don't get that. I look at many churches, and I can't say even most, but I look at many churches, and I think if they could have this banner of truth over the entryway of their building, I think it would say, we would love for you to come on in, and if you're enough like us, you're gonna like it. But if you're not enough like us, you're not gonna like it, and we're not gonna like you. Those churches will eventually kill themselves, or they will become so incestuous, not morally or physically, but spiritually incestuous, that they become completely disabled, and they lose their impact in the world and their influence for the sake of Christ. It breaks my heart to see this. And most of the people in those churches would never, ever want to believe that that's true about them and their church. Well, I'm throwing rocks, and I don't have any permission from God. I certainly don't have any right to throw rocks at anybody. So I have to look into my own life and think, how like-minded am I? Do I have to have everything my way? See, to be like-minded, either we both have to think exactly alike, which I don't think is possible, or one of our views has to win out over the other, which is dangerous. And when you're in a win-lose situation, somebody's a loser. Or our objective is high enough and noble enough that the goal is so compelling for both of us that we will permit one another our individuality. There's a whole lot to the idea of like-minded. It comes down to this. A like-minded group rarely happens by accident, especially a like-minded group whose objective is to become more and more like Jesus. That never happens accidentally. Now, I do think that people of like minds tend to gravitate toward each other. And I think in the church we have to be careful that our like-mindedness is not around our preferences. Okay, now I'm going to start meddling. It's not around our preferences for what kind of style people wear when they come to church, what kind of music our musicians play for us, not how loud the music is. Our preferences are very different in that regard. It isn't about preference. If it's about preference, we set ourselves up for a win-lose mentality. My preference will win, and then when my preference wins, your preference will lose. That's just how it works. This is not God's design for like-mindedness. Well, you know what? I got just a couple of more minutes, and I don't want to burn it off on a hobby horse. After like-minded comes be sympathetic. Have you noticed that when people are pressing for their own perspective in this win-lose scenario, they're seldom sympathetic? When we are in competition against one another for ideas or for status or for whatever, sympathy is not really much in play. It's not part of the formula. In a healthy family, sympathy must always be in play. Now, don't mistake sympathy or make sympathy sloppier than it really is. My experience with sympathy is it is often messy, but it doesn't have to be sloppy. For me to be sympathetic is for me to be able to put myself in your shoes, to imagine what you are going through. Why? So that I can open my heart towards you. Sympathy has nothing to do with me fixing you. This has nothing to do with whether what you did was right or wrong or good or bad. Honestly, I do realize that it's more difficult to have sympathy for somebody who did something stupid and now they're paying the price. I mean, I'm talking now about how I am, okay? But sympathy has to do with opening my heart to the experience of another. Generally, we think of sympathy for bad, sad, negative, difficult things. Yes. But isn't there a sense in which when someone else is happy, sympathy would be to respond to them with happiness? I mean, I think it's James that wrote, "Weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice." I think that is a tiny picture in a little frame of what it is to be sympathetic. Sympathy so often is absent. It's always absent in a legalistic environment. I believe that the main thing that makes sympathy possible is grace. Grace that makes it possible for us to love, and part of love is sympathy. So we only looked at two things, like-mindedness and sympathy. I'm going to come back to that, and we'll move forward next time. I hope I get to connect with you this way on So Care with Stevie Boy next time.